And welcome to another recording of Table Talk. Let me remind you that the team at UMI is here to help your businesses go further. They do so by taking the hard work out of finding and using the best information, expertise, and finance. And finance is indeed the subject of today with my special guest, John Auckland. Now, John is the founder of Tribefirst and a crowdfunding specialist. He's helped over 60 companies raise in excess of £25 million. And John is also the Virgin Startup trainer and consultant, delivering their branded workshop and webinars and programs on all aspects of crowdfunding. John, a warm welcome to Table Talk.
Thank you, Pascal. Good to be here.
So listen, one thing that we were very keen to talk to you about is obviously maybe the journey that people have to go through in terms of discovering crowdfunding for the first time and also getting success, down the line. But before we move into maybe the nuts and bolts of crowdfunding, I'm intrigued about your own journey. How did it all begin, and what essentially took you into launching Tribefirst?
Yeah, it's a great question, and anyone that I've ever spoken to that's ended up in crowdfunding always kind of finds himself almost there by accident. It's quite a nascent industry even now. It's still really only sort of 8-9 years old, and so my background is as a copywriter. So I ran my own copywriting agency, and then was a director of a marketing agency. And it was at this marketing communications agency we were approached by a former Formula One team. And they asked us if we could support them with a crowdfunding campaign. And, we kind of looked at it. We didn't really know, if we're being that honest, what crowdfunding was. I was the resident crowdfunding expert because I'd helped my mates raise $5 grand on Kickstarter. so they kind of passed the baton to me. As we kind of looked into it, we realized how powerful it can be as a marketing technique as well as a way of raising funds. And we also realised that it's essentially it's a campaign that we do for any of these big corporate clients in exactly the same way. It takes all of the same elements of marketing, PR, communications, tribe engagement, all of the things that make a good marketing PR campaign also makes a good crowdfunding campaign. But the more we looked into it, the more we realised actually very few people were approaching it in this way. They're either kind of business consultants or they were sort of digital marketing agencies or PR agencies that would take one small part of what's needed in isolation and deliver, well enough on that. But that's not good enough. You need to do everything. A kind of full service marketing communications campaign. So we applied our methodology to this campaign. It was for Brabham, which is, as I said, the Formula One team that was looking to get back into team management in motorsport. And it was a huge success. It raised £300,000, which at the time, 5 years ago, I think it was now, that was the world's biggest ever sports crowdfunding campaign. And we made all sorts of mistakes in terms of, not in terms of actually delivering the campaign, but in terms of what kind of campaign it was in the first place. So, for example, a crowdfunding campaign should have a product of some kind. It should have something that's fairly established. And we just crowdfunded the idea itself in a really early stage, a kind of concept stage, and that's too early, really. So, not to kind of jump ahead and start going into advice, but just highlights that you should be in a position where you've done a lot of the risky stuff yourself through friends and family investment, startup loans, that kind of thing, or personal investment. Do all the risky stuff, do all the R&D, and then deliver at least some kind of minimum viable product. And we didn't know that, so we made all those mistakes, and yet it was still a resounding success. And so, off the back of that success, we were approached by a number of other companies that said, "You helped Brabham, can you help us?" And again, digging a bit deeper into it, 7 or 8 companies approached us. Almost every single one of them had been let down in some way by a marketing agency or PR agency or someone like that. And when you look a bit deeper, it transpired that they were being let down because these agencies were offering their support on a kind of speculative basis. So the way that it works with marketing PR agencies is, you can never use all of your time, and what you sell is your time, and you can never sell all of it. So you've always got some downtime, some spare downtime. So these companies were using that downtime, speculating, so doing kind of risk reward work with these companies. So speculating with their downtime, but as soon as a big fee paying client would come along, they would drop the speculative work because they had to. And this was endemic in the kind of crowdfunding marketing industry. I saw it all over. And so there were a few specialist agencies in the US, but none in Europe at the time. So I left my previous agency. I kind of found my calling, if you will, and realized this is what I want to do. Working with startups is incredibly inspiring. They're incredibly passionate. The gains you can make from a kind of KPI perspective is measurable. You can see great big jumps, great big leaps. You can see a direct correlation between the work you do and the results that you achieve. And that's a lot harder in the kind of big corporate world. So yeah, I left the big corporate world, moved into startups, and that's kind of my origin story. I started Tribefirst almost 4 years ago now, and we've grown from me and one copywriter that I brought with me from the old agency to there's now 15 of us. And as you say, we've had nearly 70 companies raise, probably in excess of about 27 million now. So going from strength to strength, and yeah, very keen to do more.
Excellent. So as I mentioned to you and to our audience and listeners, we kind of had a discussion, John and I, just before this recording, looking at maybe 3 key areas I want to explore with you. One is, to your point earlier, why perhaps people are not considering it more often than they should, crowdfunding. This is with some hesitation. If you just use what I would use, for example, where you check what people are searching for on Google, just to get a bit of a barometer of the mood out there. People are still looking for the more traditional means of raising finance in terms of such volume compared to crowdfunding. So I'm looking at this hesitation and maybe perhaps something that's not fully understood about crowdfunding. And once we've explored that, then we'll be looking to the practical steps of, then how do you go about building your confidence, but also increasing your success. But before we move on to that, I want to pick on the term tribe, which you've mentioned quite a few times now, not just because of the name of your organization, but actually from the outset. What do you mean by tribe, and why is it important?
So tribes are important because, and I'd love to say that I coined this term myself, but it was coined by Seth Godin, who's a great marketer, great thinker. And when he talks about a tribe, he talks about it in the context of marketing, in terms of if you have very strong beliefs, opinions, likes, dislikes, and other people out there share those likes, dislikes with you, then they will flock together. And in a marketing context, this is companies creating something great, and then rather than customers, consumers, as members of the tribe recognize what's great about it, and that kind of flock to you because they share those common ideas. And so that is the modern way of marketing, and the traditional marketing industry probably just hasn't recognized that yet. And so we keep getting spammed with advertising and digital marketing that is at best ineffective and at worst actually misleading or scams, right? And just inundated with all of this noise, and it's actually meaningless to us. And so digital technologies that are meant to connect us better are just being misused, because what the internet has created is this power to define yourself not by where you live, not by your geography, but by shared interests and shared common interests. And so the idea of a tribe is that the internet technologies allow us to connect with like-minded people wherever they are in the world. If you apply that to a kind of commercial context, then that this is why small companies individual founders of small companies can have a global presence, because they just have really strong, distinct ideas. And so this lends itself towards crowdfunding incredibly well, because the idea is that you create something that you believe in, you're incredibly passionate about, and that is different from other things that are out there. So it serves only a relatively small niche, but when you apply that to a global audience, obviously that's still potentially huge. And so the perfect campaigns for crowdfunding are these types of businesses where you have really strong identities as a company, as a founder, really clear about what you like, what you dislike, and about what value you're going to bring to your customers. And so not only can these people around the world then become your customers, they can actually also join you on that journey. They can invest in your company. And they can genuinely be a part of your tribe, not just by buying your stuff, but and telling their mates about your brand, but actually being a shareholder and sharing in your success. So I personally think that crowdfunding is the wrong term. It's the wrong name. They're not crowds. It might start as a crowd, but what you end up with is a tribe. So hence the name Tribefirst.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and always delighted to have a reference to Seth Godin, who's been an inspiration for many of us in that milieu. So, all right then, am I right in thinking that there's some hesitation about crowdfunding still, and is there perhaps some misunderstanding about where it fits in within perhaps the more it would come across perhaps not as legitimate as other form of raising finance? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think it comes down to a few things. I think it's people that there's two ends of the spectrum. The people that try to crowdfund lifestyle businesses, and so therefore, ultimately probably fail because it doesn't quite have the scale or it's interesting to those people, but it doesn't have that capacity to bring a large sort of tribe of people together. So that's kind of on that end of the scale. And then on the other end of the scale, there's a degree of the old industry, the old way of doing things, and as we all know, old ways, old habits die hard, right? And old industries are hard to break down. And so, purely the only reason that there is any kind of pushback against crowdfunding is because it's the old industry pushing back or creating misinformation. And of course, they're going to do this. There's nothing kind of what's the word I'm looking for? There's nothing kind of malevolent about them doing this, right? It's just, old industries, traditional industries, they protect themselves from disruption. And they do that by reminding everyone what's so great about what they do and saying what's so bad about the new stuff coming through and why it's so risky. And so you get the old VCs and angel industries kind of spotting, the potential flaws in crowdfunding and where it can go wrong, and highlighting those things and blowing them out of proportion to scare people because they see their market share going. That is starting to change because what VCs are now starting to recognise is that crowdfunding is a brilliant thing because it's taking a lot of the risk off their hands and allowing the cream to rise to the top, and then they can come in and do what they're meant to do, which is provide significant scale at a point where that company is ready to scale. And angel investors are probably the kind of biggest problem in this, although again, angel investors are absolutely needed by the ecosystems I'll come on to in a bit. But angels have probably had a bit too good a ride for too long. But actually that has been the cause of growth not being as fast as it possibly could be, because it's caused potentially kind of less risk taking. And risk taking in early stage businesses is a good thing. It's a good thing for lots of reasons, because it creates jobs. It's a breeding ground for innovation. It allows progress, to kind of happen faster. So risk in early stage business is a very, very good thing. And we're lucky enough in this country that a lot of that risk is that our government recognises that, and so they provide good tax relief to investors through SEIS and EIS. So under SEIS, you can claim up to 80% of your investment back as an investor against your income tax bill, and so your risk is actually, it's only 20% of the overall financial commitment you're making, right? So it's not even actually that risky for the investor. So that risk is kind of almost protected, and that's because the government recognises all of those things that I just said. Risk is a good thing in early stage companies, and so the negative commentators that are out there tend to come from old finance backgrounds, and so look at it and say, they've been preconditioned to say that risk is entirely bad. It can never be a good thing. And so there's one, I certainly won't name them, but there's one particular negative commentator who has probably done quite a lot of destructive damage around this by focusing on that point and saying just how that risk is a bad thing. And that's, because they come from just a different era where, there were protections in place to stop retail investors to be able to profit from early stage businesses. You had to be a sophisticated investor, and it was perceived that sophistication was dictated by how much money you have, which is madness. I know a lot of retail investors that have really done research. They're well educated. They have a more rigorous, robust scoring system than some of the VCs that I even know, and yet they might only invest £100 into a campaign. So you can't tell me level of sophistication is dictated by how much money you have. And that's always been the benchmark previously. And so these negative commentators use this as a way of saying there's no sophistication. People are throwing their money away, not knowing what they're investing into. And yes, the industry does still have a bit of a problem with kind of making those risks, making people aware of those risks. And there's accountability issues of no one kind of puts a hand up and saying we're responsible for that, because the due diligence is very light and it's very much buyer beware. And so, yes, those risks, I think there needs to be a better education around those risks. However, I think it's an incredibly good thing that average people, plumbers, cleaners, white collar workers, blue collar workers, can all invest under the same terms, and it's not just rich bankers or investment bankers or high net worth earners that get to benefit from these early stage companies and the growth that they can achieve.
I wonder if that's actually timely for me to ask you what your definition of crowdfunding is, based on your experience and so on. Do you have maybe a way to describe it that is helpful for others to understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two types of crowdfunding. There's three in reality. There's rewards crowdfunding, which is I'm putting on a play, or I'm making a movie, or I'm making a hardware product, and if enough people give me enough money to go and make this thing, then I'll give it to everyone for a reduced rate from what I'm going to sell it at a later date. So but also you'll potentially get additional rewards above. So, if it's a movie, you'll get the movie for free with your pledge. Maybe you get your name in the credits. Maybe you get to appear in the movie. If it's a hardware product, maybe you get it in a special color that's specifically for crowdfunding backers, whatever that is. The issue with rewards crowdfunding is that there have been a lot of spectacular failures where companies have raised significant sums and then haven't been able to deliver on the product. Because if you think about it, if you're giving people essentially a discount on the product that you're about to make, that margin's got to go somewhere. And so invariably what they were doing is not raising enough money to actually build the product in the first place, having to go back out raising more money just to fulfill the back orders, and then they didn't have enough money to then create more stock to then go to market. So only actually a small proportion of hardware companies specifically are actually any good for crowdfunding. Software tech doesn't rewards crowdfund well, so it's really, really great for arts projects. And I think that's why Kickstarter kind of recognized that, and a few years ago moved away from being a kind of generic rewards crowdfund all things to being an arts platform that will also let you crowdfund whatever you want to crowdfund, if that makes sense. So they changed their mission. And we actually stopped doing rewards crowdfunding about 18 months ago because of those inherent risks of delivery. Nothing to do with inherent risks of actually raising the money in the first place. Those risks of actually going to deliver a quality product. It has a place. I want to be very clear about that. But that's why specifically today I'm going to talk about equity crowdfunding for those reasons. There's also charity crowdfunding, but most people know that as things like Just Giving. It's not really worth talking about in this context. And there's a kind of debt peer-to-peer crowdfunding as well, which also isn't without its problems. So these are bonds or loans where the banks are giving low interest, and so if you cut out that intermediary and then allow investors to directly invest into the company, then the investors get a higher interest rate, the company get a lower interest rate, right? But the problem is you still need an intermediary. Just because that intermediary is a technology company rather than a bank or a banker, there's still an intermediary there. So they make it more efficient, make it better cost for everyone, but they're going through their own learning curve in terms of the risk that they've had to take and backing potentially too risky companies. So this is why we're huge fans of equity crowdfunding, and that's why this is our focus. So equity crowdfunding is a retail investor and some sophisticated investors buying shares in the companies they love. And that's really important. The companies they love is the really, really important part, because you don't just go crowdfunding if you want to raise money. As you identified earlier, Pascal, there are still other perfectly viable routes to raise money. If you're a lifestyle business, those routes are better for you. For some high growth companies or people that work on sensitive stuff that they don't want the world to know about yet, those traditional routes are still absolutely fine. But for everyone else, anyone that's got a world-changing idea, fast growth company, everyone should be equity crowdfunding. And the reason for this is because it's a way of you bringing your biggest evangelists together, all under one sort of virtual reef, so to speak. And it's a way of you getting their buy-in so that you can empower them to go out there and turbocharge word of mouth, tell all their mates. We consistently see 300%, 400% more likely that a crowdfunding investor will refer via word of mouth the businesses that they're crowdfunded in versus a non-crowdfunding customer. Some companies had 500% better customer retention through their crowdfunding investors. These numbers are just across the board. They're so far higher. And that's because they are early adopters, but also the biggest evangelists of the company. And what's great is they come in a really early stage in the company as well, which is when the company will benefit most. So equity crowdfunding, put very simply, is a company sells shares. Normally, anywhere between sort of 10 and 25% is probably the bracket that you should look to sell in any one given raise, any given crowdfunding campaign. So that typically you'll sell between 10%, 25% of the business in a given raise to people that love you the most. Yes, they might expect to see a financial return, and obviously there should be that side of things should be built into it, and you should be clear about where their exit's going to come and all the risks that are involved and all of this kind of stuff. But the principal driver behind these investors investing in these companies is that they love them and they want to be a part of the journey. And so actually equity crowdfunding also takes the best bits of reward crowdfunding as well, because you can actually still offer stuff. If you're an online marketplace that sells goods that are meant to last for more than 10 years. So this is a company that we worked with, a company called Buy Me Once. You can offer discount codes for that platform. So people that really, really care about products, conscious consumerism, products that are going to last for a really, really long time, I can not only invest in this company that I believe in that's doing so much good, they're also going to give me discount codes so I can buy that stuff off their platform. And what they might even do is, it's coming as Christmas, here's a friends and family discount code so you can go tell your mates. So that is equity crowdfunding. It is a marketing first, fundraising second approach of raising funds.
In your experience, have you found some resistance, or even just people listening to saying, on John, you're saying that I'm going to find people who are going to love me so much, or the proposition is going to be so attractive that they're going to want to invest. Are people sometimes suffering from what I call misplaced modesty, where they think, well, we're not that great, surely not going to have fans and people are going to be that passionate from that early stage?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see this with that there are a lot more male entrepreneurs that crowdfund than female, and yet female entrepreneurs crowdfund better. And that's a really good example of a kind of a misplaced modesty, where women do generally tend to, because they've had years of gender bias to deal with, they tend to be more modest and more cautious than men, because men have been told that they're great throughout their lives, and so they've got generally kind of overinflated sort of sense of self-importance. And this is one of the problems that we're looking to address, and this is something specifically the Virgin Startup are doing in their kind of 50-50 pledge, where they want to they're pledging to fund as many female entrepreneurs as male entrepreneurs. And so that's a prime example of, if you're, in my mind, if you're scared to take your product to crowdfunding, you're scared to take your product to market. You're scared to take your product to market, give up now. It is that simple. And the reality, because people are, it also all of a sudden it becomes quite real when you start taking it to crowdfunding, and people are going to start judging you. And so, yes, that's the whole point of bringing anything to market, right? People are going to judge you because they're going to judge whether they want to buy this or be a part of your journey or take your service or whatever it is. So to me, that's another reason why you should go equity crowdfunding, because if it doesn't work, that's telling you a lot. As long as you execute the right campaign in the right way and get the right kind of either education or support, if your campaign doesn't work, there's fundamentally something wrong with the business you need to go away and fix before you take it back to market again. And so, yeah, there is that kind of misplaced modesty or inherent fear, and people, in reality, they just need to get over that. And you wouldn't believe it, when we first put our business model together, we assumed we'd probably have about a 70% success rate. 70% of the companies that we work with would launch their campaign, 30% of them would fail to reach their target, 70% would succeed. It's actually 90%. So only 10% of the companies that we work with, and that's even going down, year after year. But only 10% of the companies that we work with actually fail in their campaign. So that goes to show if you follow everything in the right way, and yes, we're selective over who we work with, but only from a perspective of can we market this, not, do they have loads of money already lined up? Is this a sure thing? Do they have rich mates? We're not looking at that. We're looking at, are they marketable and can we do a good job? And so yes, there's some filtration process, and yet still only 10% of those companies go on to fail. What that statistic doesn't tell you is something like 40% of the companies we work with never make it to campaigning. Their campaign never goes live. Or it launches in private mode, but then never goes live to the public. And of course, again, there are some mitigating circumstances to that. Sometimes we don't find lead investment, and lead investment is quite important. No one wants to go first, so you need to have some kind of lead investment in place, which again I'll talk about in the next section. But the reality is, most people they just have so much fear, and also all of a sudden, once we start doing this work and we create the pitch deck and their pitch page, we shoot their video, and they see themselves talking about their own proposition, and they lose their bottle, they lose their nerve, and they just say, I'm not going to do this anymore. So yeah, we spend quite a lot of our time coaching people to get into the right frame of mind to want to do it. But as I said, it's something that generally we need to get over, because if we can't get over it in a crowdfunding context, we'll never be able to be successful business people.
Thank you very much for taking the time to explore that, because as a very close cousin to your work, I get involved in online reputation, digital marketing, and it feels the same when people, have to press the very first time they have to press publish for that blog post or for that video or for that podcast and so on. But then fast forward a few weeks, 3 months later, people are just fine, because it becomes a means to an end. So yes, it's okay to feel scared, but it's not okay not to take action. That's the way I would look at it. So let's move on to the second segment. That gives me a wonderful segue. Can we double up? Can you give us, therefore, your advice about what we can do to build one's confidence, but also the steps to have a marketing first campaign for your crowdfunding?
Yeah, so those two things are quite intrinsically linked, because obviously if you start to see things go well in the early days, then that builds confidence, right? So if you see a positive reaction from your community, your friends and family tell you you're doing a good thing, it's all validation that helps build confidence. So there's kind of 3 markets that you need to warm up, I guess, for your crowdfunding campaign. So in your pre-marketing phase, obviously, as I mentioned, you need to find lead investment. Lead investment is probably going to come from either a friend or family, or ex-colleague, or someone that knows you in a professional capacity, or it's going to come from a professional angel. So as I said earlier, angels still have a very important role to play in this whole journey, because they are professionals, and they know a good deal when they see one, and it's their job to kind of spot these good deals. So phase 1 is to find that lead investment. And that's also kind of validation gateway number 1 as well. And that's also the place where a lot of people get stuck. So, going back to my kind of previous point, but the 40% of companies that we work with, often it is that they kind of lose their nerve, lose their bottle, but it's also because that lead investment doesn't come in. And because it's not coming in, that's where they start getting the fear, because then they're starting to say, well, what's wrong with me? So before you can go and find lead investment, you need to have a really solid, professional-looking pitch deck. You need a financial model that is, it's not a legal requirement to have a financial model or any financial forecast for a crowdfunding campaign. But the reality is, you're not going to find a professional investor, or you're not going to get anyone to have the confidence to go first and put slightly more money in than the crowd will, unless you've got a good financial model. And they're not holding you to those numbers. Your model is there because it just builds confidence. It shows you're working out. It's like your maths test at school, right? You can't just give the answer. You need to show the working out, and that's what your financial model does. Importantly, you need a good story, because even those angel investors, or certainly the right angel investor, will buy into your story and will still be investing because they love what you're doing. Of course, again, they still need to see that financial return, but they're backing your idea, and they're backing you, and they're believing in you. And that all starts with a story. So what is your origin story? Where did you have the idea? What was the light bulb moment? What was your personal pain point you were trying to solve? And tell it like a human, as you would, as a story, because it's far more relatable, and you're far more likely to get the right kind of angel investor. Because, again, I don't want to jump ahead to kind of the next section, but we talk about learning from campaigns that have failed. You know, probably half of them have failed because lead investors have pulled out. And in one instance, we had a lead investor pull out the very last day of the campaign. And that was because they were the wrong investor. And so what we spent the entire campaign trying to keep this one lead investor happy, when they were never really a part of the tribe. They were just someone that was there to try and make some money out of this idea. And so there was a complete mismatch. So finding your lead investor is definitely a two-way interview process. It's very easy to say yes to someone when they've got the money and get false validation from someone just because they're giving you cash, when they're not actually joining your tribe because they love you. So that's the lead investment. Media, I'd say, probably comes next. And the media is important because again, that's probably the greatest validation, and it gives you a real buzz as a founder, as an entrepreneur, when you start getting coverage about your idea. When the media are your influencers in your industry. So I'm not talking about getting sort of front page of the Daily Telegraph or anything like that. It's not, that's what most people think of when they think of PR. But no, I'm talking about your trade media, your peers, your industry, the commentators in your industry. They're the people that actually validate you better, but also they have access to the communities that care about you most, right? Because they're in your industry. And they are the curators and the gatekeepers of your idea, in a sense, because if they like it and they recognize that their audience will like it, and it is literally their job. Their only job is not to write stories. Their job is to understand what their audience wants and deliver what the content that their audience wants. That's the media's job, because that's how they make their money. And so they know what will sell to their audience. And so if you go to the media with an idea, and again, as long as it's packaged in the right way and you get the right kind of professional help, or you know how to do it yourself, as long as that story is right, if the media takes it, that is validation number two. If they don't take it, hang on, maybe there's something wrong with the idea. Maybe you've got to go back and rework it. So you get that media validation, and that also gives you huge amounts of exposure as well, which is two benefits. And then the third audience you need to reach out to are the kind of members of the public who could ultimately become your tribe. So great if you've already got existing customers. If you don't have existing customers, then you've got to kind of essentially start your marketing campaign now, because that's when you start going out and finding, whether it's through PR, continuation of that kind of audience number two, whether it's direct marketing, whether it's building up your Facebook page, your Instagram, potentially even LinkedIn if you're a B2B proposition, but going out there, growing that audience, or engaging the audiences you already have and turning them into investors or turning them into paid up members of your tribe. That's kind of audience number three. You need to hit all three of those collectively in the pre-marketing stage. And the reason you need to do this is, the reality is that the platform will bring money to the table. So Crowdcube, Seeders, Syndicate Room, all these other platforms, Angel's Den, they bring money to the table, but generally the investors that are on their platform, they're relatively time poor, and they obviously see a lot of campaigns. So they're only going to really look at the campaigns that are trending, that are doing particularly well, or the ones that really kind of hit their sweet spot and the things that they're interested in. And they're also so conditioned now to see campaigns doing well, being kind of 80% plus, that generally they'll only really kind of go on and back the campaigns that are doing particularly well. So to be quite clear, this is an exercise of you going out and essentially, creating your own tribe out of this exercise. It's just great that the platforms have got, kind of ready-made audience that get crowdfunding, that don't have any sort of fears or barriers to overcome of actually doing the kind of the crowdfunding bit itself. But they are going to turbocharge your campaign, and they're going to top it up. They're not the principal source of investment. They come last, not first. And that's why most people get it wrong.
Right. Well, that's a very, very important point then, because the temptation, of course, is to get on with the grafting of, compiling the words and the images and the videos, publish them on the platform, and then wait for something, or to do it. So would you say that you almost want to make sure that your timing when you publish whatever information on the platform is such that you've got a strong foundation already in place, as opposed to hoping with the platform to help you build that foundation from zero?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's a ready-made audience there, but obviously a ready-made audience of, yes, there's 750,000 at the time of speaking investors on Crowdcube. Maybe sort of 200,000-300,000 of those are active at any time or whatever. So that's a massive audience. So it stands to reason that within that audience, in the Venn diagram of equity crowdfunding investors, and people that care about, your conscious consumerism marketplace. Obviously, that's quite a good example because it's probably quite a big crossover. But if you're selling a new age bike light, for example, maybe it's a smaller audience because there's not many cyclists. And then maybe you're selling something really, really niche, like a new kind of bowls equipment or something like that. The audience is going to get even smaller, right? So, it's better for you to kind of, your audience, you know your people, and in theory, you should already be a bit of an influencer in your industry. It's always relatively hard for people that haven't kind of made a bit of a name for themselves in their industry to kind of start from scratch. But that journey's got to start somewhere. And it's not going to work by you just sticking your idea up on Crowdfunding and everyone just loves it and they just invest into it. It happens. Of course it happens. It's, certain campaigns, they trend, but that is it. They're trending and no one can predict, trends any more than someone can predict, when the stock market's going to crash or whatever. You can make reasonable guesses, but you can never predict entirely. And so it's important that you build that solid foundation. Well, it's not even important, it's absolutely essential. And that's where a lot of that validation comes from.
So could I ask, you saw me making notes, obviously, which will be added to the show notes under this video and so on. I circled the word story a few times because you mentioned it in a conversation. So would you mind if we dug into that a bit more? I sensed that some people may over-engineer or over-complicate their story, but I sense also that you worry that they may miss actually some of the most important points, or be dismissive that, oh, that's not going to be as important, as interesting, let's not mention it, but as a result, not make their story as compelling as it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. And this comes down to, human beings are storytellers. It's myth is built into our language, our culture, and that's where stories are our way of understanding and seeing the world and communicating. We don't do it through technical language or ideas unless we're trying to engineer a train or do something like that. And that's not what crowdfunding is. Again, you're trying to find people that love you and bring them on board with your idea and your vision. And so it's absolutely essential that you tell your story. You have to personalize it. So you have to do it from a perspective of what was your journey. And if you explain, it makes it far more relatable, and the people that are listening to your story then relate themselves to it and have greater empathy. Because that's how we're conditioned. Crowdfunding is, of course, it's equal play of rational and emotional decision making. However, you have to get through that emotional decision making layer before you get to the rational point. So most crowdfunding investment is probably 85% emotional, 15% rational in terms of the journey that you take. Even if an investor kind of looks back and says, well, ultimately the decision was made on a 50-50 basis. And what I mean by that is, normally it's the kind of, certainly the retail investors, what will happen is they will see an idea, love it, buy into it, and then look for reasons not to invest. So what I'm saying there is that they're bought, they're sold. Some people will even click right there and invest. But what most people will do is then go through a kind of relatively basic due diligence process of looking for significant problems that puts them off that first impression that they had. And the first impression that they have, of course, is generated about the first story that you tell. That's on your pitch page on Crowdfunding, that's your video, that's if you go to a pitch event. All of these things need to start with your personal story. And 70, 80% of the pitches that I see don't even mention their personal story at all, which is madness.
And do you think that's because there's almost a history, in business and industry to hide behind the product brand or even the company brand, and let the individuals rarely come forward? I mean, there's been a rise, obviously, in my domain of personal branding, and it's becoming more the topic. But there's still this idea of much more comfortable to put the product and the company forward, and I'll stay behind.
Absolutely, and that's about crowdfunding as well, is that it's the number one reason for investing is not the idea. There's a million good ideas out there, especially when, again, we're infinitely connected through the internet. Ideas are now everywhere, and anyone can have an idea. And so investors are backing people because they're buying into their vision. So the number one reason, surveys done by Crowdfunding and Seed, is the number one reason is always team. It's always the founder, the founding team. So if you're an absolutely legitimate reason why you might not crowdfund is because, you know, you're not confident standing in front of a room full of people or standing in front of a camera. So, you know, there's the only solution to that then is to get presentation training, something you can absolutely do. And some of the founders that I've worked with have been the most nervous, refused to stand up in front of a room full of people. In fact, on our pilot cohort of the Virgin Startup Crowdfunding program that we run, you know, there was a guy in the room, I won't give his name, but he was absolutely terrified of public speaking. Like, he wouldn't even stand up in our room of 8 other companies, or instead of 5 other companies on cohort, on the pilot. He wouldn't even stand up in a room full of just 5 companies and talk about his company. He was that terrified. And yet when it came to the pitch, his was the best presentation, but hands down. And it's because he identified within himself that he had that fear. And so he went and got training. And for him, it was just following a process. He didn't think about the people in the room and all this kind of stuff. And so his was hands down the best pitch on the night. So anyone can do it. Absolutely anyone can learn how to do this. It's just a skill like any other. And if you really just cannot overcome that fear, or you don't have the money to pay for the training or anything like that, then you're just going to have to get a spokesperson with the company that's not yourself. You know, it's a simple matter. And quite, you know, that has happened a number of times. We've had companies that have come in that, you know, it's their marketer that does the speaking for them or something like that, or they get a PR specialist in or something like that. You know, there's always someone out there that's willing to kind of stand up and tell a story.
Are there some stories that have stayed with you, you know, that you're happy to share with us?
Yeah. So I think one of the most vivid, because I've experienced it myself, and it just creates quite you know, it's easy to kind of inspire imagination and put yourself in that position. Is we worked with a Portuguese company called Homeit. And so they have it's for Airbnb, home and away properties, those kind of properties, access solutions. But it's actually more than just access solutions, it's full management. So if you have a rental property, short-term rental property, you know, you can give a virtual key via mobile to one of their access solutions. You can let in cleaners at a certain time. You can do a virtual management solution, all this kind of stuff. So it's like a full management solution, but obviously access to the holiday maker, to the property at any given time, even if their flight's delayed, is obviously the biggest thing, right? And so their story comes from that they were visiting, I think it was Barcelona, trying to go to an Airbnb property. It was raining, their flight was delayed. They tried getting hold of the host, couldn't get hold of them. They ended up sleeping all night in the doorway of the property because they couldn't get into it. Now, you know, that is a personal pain point right there that, you know, all of a sudden everyone can relate to. And even if you've not ever visited an Airbnb property before, you just kind of, you know, oh God, that would be horrible. You know, first day of your holiday, absolutely ruined because of this. And so that really stuck with me. And they were great storytellers in that respect. They've had two successful rounds. You know, we supported them across both of those. And it's just a great story that stuck with me. And again, it's quite a technical product. There's lots of parts that play. There's the access to the device. There's the software platform. There's the user app. You know, there's loads of stuff that to talk about, that it could have got quite complicated. In fact, it did get very complicated as soon as we started speaking about all of that stuff. But the bit everyone related to was that story at the start. What else? And then there's the other one. I probably so we've done a campaign for a company called Recycle. So they create a home recycling device where you can put all of your plastics and glass and everything into the device. It will grind it down into its constituent parts at home, and then they'll come and collect the raw material for you. So zero wastage. Because as you've probably seen from the news recently, you know, people think that you put all your stuff in recycling and it gets put back into raw material and back into industry. That is just not true. You know, 90% of it gets burnt. Only 10% of it actually ends up back in industry, which is madness. It's an incredibly inefficient way of doing it. You know, getting councils to come and collect it. You know, the infrastructure around that is very expensive in the first place. And you know, we're all very kind of emotional about this problem, right? Because we've all seen the David Attenborough shows and you know, the piles of plastic in and then the floating island of in the specific of the plastic island. Now, all of this stuff is kind of creates very emotional responses in people anyway. And so when he tells that story about how little of it actually ends up back in industry, it blows people's minds. They don't realise this. He's literally educating them that this problem is so bad. And so that story, I think, because it creates such an epiphany in people's minds, he's pre-prototype. He's raising money for a prototype. Going back to my original starting point around Brabham, that's breaking all the rules. You meant to have at least a prototype, right? And then you're raising money for manufacturing or the first proper run of the prototype or whatever, not pre-prototype. And yeah, it raised all the money because people, it created this visceral reaction in people, and people recognise the problem. And so yeah. They're two examples. There are so many.
No, but thanks. They're very helpful because they are very simple stories in their own kind of right, but that emotional connection, the reaction we all getting as I'm listening to you, people watching videos, I see me nodding away with immense frustration as you retell the story of the plastic and the waste and so on. So that's excellent. Listen, unfortunately, our time together is nearly coming to an end. So before I let you go, let's take the view that our viewers and listeners have been truly inspired by what you've shared with us. How do I begin? What do I do next then to get this going?
Yeah, so kind of as I said earlier, in theory, as long as you have all of the right things in place and all of the professional help or the in-house ability to create all of the content that you need, then you should be ready to create a campaign. And as I say, you're going to need to go out and find lead investment, prepare all your pitch materials, run a PR and marketing campaign. You're going to need good copywriting skills across all of this, good design skills, good networks or access to people that have good networks to angel investors. Once you've kind of got all of those things in place, then that's a good stage to start speaking to one of the platforms. Lead investment, you probably need to try and find, I'd say, in reality, a good 20–30% of your initial target amount before you are at a stage where you want to start speaking to the platforms, because the platforms won't let you put your campaign up unless you've got at least that amount. So start your journey there by trying to find that lead investment. And obviously, as I say, you're going to need to go and get probably professional help or at least put all those materials together in-house to be able to do that. In terms of that professional help, the best places to go, in my opinion, are hands down the best program is the Virgin Startup Program called Crowdboost. So that's a 6-week accelerator program currently run in London. They run between sort of 3 and 5 cohorts a year, depending on dates and that kind of stuff. We're trying to get it up to 5 at the moment. So just go on to virginstartup.org/crowdboost and apply there for the next cohort. We'll probably run another one before the end of the year. That's definitely the best support in terms of kind of knowledge transfer and training. Outside of that, I'd recommend getting professional help from, an entity like Tribefirst. This isn't just a shameless plug, a crowdfunding support agency. Just Google crowdfunding support agencies and try and work out which one you think is best for you. There's some that are more kind of video focused. So Wow Your Crowd, for example, so they're kind of more video focused. So if you're strong at marketing and everything else, but weak at video, then Wow Your Crowd. If it's kind of the business structure and you want a bit more consultancy and guidance, then it's someone like Idea Squares, but maybe less so on the kind of marketing. So if you're good at marketing in-house, they might be a good option. What else? And if you want support, and so Tribefirst's position is to support entirely across the board for people that want to essentially outsource the bulk of their campaign. Then we do a managed service, but it's only really for companies that are raising £500,000 plus. So anyone under that, that's where we push them towards kind of Virgin Startup, Crowdboost more. But yeah, you can just get copywriters. There are brokers out there as well. It's a bit of a minefield to help you find that lead investment. I recommend if you're going to use a broker, use something like Angel Investment Network or Swoop Funding. So that's like an all-encompassing investment platform. Avoid using brokers that charge you loads of money up front, and certainly don't use ones that don't come with good recommendations and testimonials from other people, because there are a lot of people that will take your money and then you'll never see them again. So once you've got all that, you've got your lead investment, got your pitch materials, then you and normally speak to your partner first before speaking to the platform. The platform's going to hate me for saying this, but if you speak to the partner first, then often they can get a reduction in fees from the platform, because the platform will give the referral fee to the partner. And so that just makes it more economical for you as a founder to raise money. So then you go and speak to the platform, or your partner will speak to the platform on your behalf. You set up your pitch, you put it into due diligence. That will take, once you've submitted your pitch on the platform, it will take a good 2-3 weeks to go through due diligence, because they need to fact check everything you say on that pitch to make sure it's fair and not misleading. And then you launch your campaign. Your campaign will normally last for sort of 30 days on Crowd. You see this is going to be about 45 days, I think, from now on. And then it will take you another 3 weeks or so to actually receive your money after a successful campaign as well, 3-4 weeks. So that's kind of it. Does that answer the question?
It does indeed, and I'm absolutely convinced we're going to have to press pause and rewind and listen to it again, because it was full of absolute nuggets and actionable advice there. So thank you very much, John. That's excellent. Now, I am absolutely convinced that our viewers and listeners will have probably follow-up questions for you. What is the best way to get hold of you and your colleagues at Tribefirst? Yeah,
so the best way to contact me individually is actually just connect with me on LinkedIn. So yeah, I mean, it's just John Auckland. I think there's only one of them.
Oh, you're very lucky.
Yeah. So connect with me on LinkedIn, direct message me. I'm always responsive and always happy to answer any questions. You can inquire on our website. It's just www.tribefirst.co.uk. That's probably the best way to get hold of us. Or, as I say, if you're thinking about the Accelerator program, then just go straight to the Virgin Crowd Boost page.
That's excellent. Well, listen, can I thank you on behalf of Umi and our business community for spending some time with us. I know that your diary is very, very busy. This has been an amazing conversation. Can't wait to publish it online. To you, our viewers and listeners, thank you for your support. Do keep those questions, suggestions coming. And if you do have some questions for John, send them directly to him and his team, or to ourselves, and we'll find a way maybe to do a bit of wrap-ups, offline as well. So until next time, go out there and build an amazing business. Bye-bye for now.